Major Blue stood perfectly still, his four eyes blinking in rapid succession as he watched another group of humans leap from the aircraft high above. His pale green skin turned a shade lighter, and the protective membrane over his eyes flickered rapidly. They just jumped out of a perfectly working aircraft, he said, his translator struggling to convey the mix of horror and disbelief in his voice. And they're cheering while doing it. Commander Stone, the human officer assigned to guide the alien delegation, smiled. His weathered face showed pride as he watched the parachutes bloom in the sky like giant white flowers. That's just basic airborne training, Major. Wait until you see the halo jumps. The alien delegation had arrived at Earth's International Military Training Center 3 days ago. As the military attaché from the Stellar Federation, Major Blue had visited countless training facilities across 17 different species worlds. None had prepared him for what he was witnessing on Earth. "What is halo?" asked Representative Green, another member of the delegation, her throat sacs pulsing with anxiety. "High-altitude low opening," Commander Stone explained. "They jump from much higher up and open their chutes much closer to the ground. Helps them get into enemy territory undetected." Major Blue's secondary hearts skipped a beat. His species had evolved with an intense fear of heights, a sensible adaptation for a race that had evolved on a world of towering crystal formations. The idea of deliberately falling through the air seemed like pure madness. "And these humans volunteer for this training?" he asked. "Compete for it, actually." Lieutenant Rivers joined the conversation. She was a tall, muscular human female who ran the airborne training program. "We have to turn away about half the applicants. Not everyone makes the cut." The aliens exchanged glances, their communication tendrils twitching in shared confusion. They had studied human history before this diplomatic mission, learning about their wars, their rapid technological advancement, and their surprisingly quick acceptance into the galactic community. But nothing in their briefings had prepared them for the reality of human military training. As they watched, one of the parachutes above failed to open properly. Major Blue's tendrils went rigid with horror, but before he could speak, Lieutenant Rivers was already talking into her communication device. The human instructor floating near the troubled trainee moved closer, helping them deploy their reserve chute. The situation was resolved in seconds. "That was deliberate?" Major Blue asked, noticing that none of the humans seemed particularly concerned. "Emergency procedure training," Commander Stone nodded. "Every jumper needs to know how to handle equipment failure. We simulate various problems under controlled conditions. You intentionally create dangerous situations to prepare for dangerous situations." Representative Green's translator crackled with incredulity. "Exactly." Lieutenant Rivers beamed. "Nothing builds confidence like knowing you can handle things when they go wrong." The delegation followed their guides to the next training area. The sound of explosions and gunfire made their sensory organs quiver. In a muddy field, human trainees crawled under razor wire while live ammunition flew over their heads. "These are real projectiles." Major Blue couldn't hide his alarm. His species had long ago switched entirely to energy weapons, considering projectile weapons too crude and dangerous. "Live fire exercises," Commander Stone confirmed. "The rounds are fired at a fixed height. As long as they keep their heads down, they're perfectly safe." "And this teaches several things." Lieutenant Rivers stepped in. "How to move under fire, how to control fear, how to trust your training and your equipment. Plus, it helps them get used to the sound and feel of battle conditions." Major Blue made detailed notes in his neural recorder. The Stellar Federation would need to know about this. Humans didn't just train their soldiers. They deliberately subjected them to controlled doses of trauma and stress. It seemed barbaric at first glance, but he was beginning to see a pattern. The day continued with more revelations. They witnessed hand-to-hand combat training, where humans actually struck each other with considerable force. They observed psychological stress tests where trainees were subjected to sleep deprivation and harsh environmental conditions. Each new activity seemed more intense than the last. During a brief rest period, Major Blue reviewed his notes while sampling some human coffee, a bitter stimulant beverage that the humans seemed to consume in vast quantities. Commander Stone joined him. "I sense you have questions, Major," the human said. "Many," Blue admitted. "Your methods seem extreme. My initial report will probably use the word barbaric several times. And yet," he paused, his analysis tendrils twitching as he sought the right words. "And yet, I cannot deny their effectiveness. Your soldiers appear to emerge stronger from experiences that would traumatize most species." Stone nodded. "We have a saying, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. But why accept such hardship voluntarily? Surely there are more comfortable ways to train military personnel." "Comfort doesn't prepare you for discomfort, Major." Stone watched as another group of parachutes descended in the distance. "We learned long ago that the best way to prepare for hard times is to practice enduring them. Every challenge these trainees face is carefully designed to build their capabilities and confidence." As the sun began to set, Major Blue watched a group of successful graduates receiving their badges. The pride and joy on their faces was obvious, even to his alien perception. They had endured what he considered to be madness, and they were celebrating their achievement. In his private quarters that evening, Major Blue composed his initial report to the Stellar Federation. Human military training methods initially appear chaotic and unnecessarily harsh. However, preliminary observations suggest a sophisticated methodology behind the apparent madness. They have developed a system that not only prepares their soldiers for combat, but seems to fundamentally transform them. Their voluntary acceptance of hardship, their emphasis on realistic combat conditions, and their focus on both physical and psychological resilience suggests that we may need to significantly revise our assessment of human military capabilities. He paused, then added, "Request permission to extend observation period. I suspect we have much to learn from what these humans call basic training. Though their methods seem insane by our standards, the results cannot be ignored. Perhaps, in this case, there is a fine line between madness and brilliance." As he prepared for sleep, Major Blue heard the distant sound of humans running in formation, their voices raised in unified chants. Tomorrow, Commander Stone had promised to show them something called underwater demolition training. Major Blue's analysis tendrils twitched nervously at the thought, but he found himself looking forward to it with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps, he reflected, that was the most disturbing observation of all, how quickly one could begin to see the logic in human madness. The morning began with Major Blue analyzing data from his biological sensors while drinking his third cup of coffee, a habit he picked up from the humans in just a few days. The readings from yesterday's observations were fascinating and somewhat disturbing. "Impossible," he muttered, his four eyes focusing on different parts of the data display. "Their endurance levels can't be this high." A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Commander Stone entered, wearing what humans called a smile. A gesture Major Blue had learned indicated positive emotions. "Ready for today's observations, Major? We're heading to the environmental training facilities." Major Blue's protective membranes flickered with interest. "The ones mentioned in the briefing, with artificial climate control." "Exactly. We'll start with the desert module." 2 hours later, Major Blue stood in an observation room, watching through thermal-resistant glass as human trainees marched through a massive enclosed space. The temperature inside was deliberately maintained at what humans called 120 degrees Fahrenheit, a level of heat that would have killed several species in the Stellar Federation. "They're carrying 60-pound packs," Lieutenant Rivers explained, pointing to the heavily laden trainees. "The exercise lasts 8 hours, with water rationing conditions." Representative Green's throat sacs pulsated with concern. "Water rationing? In these temperatures? They need to learn how to function with limited resources," Commander Stone said. "In real combat situations, you can't always count on regular supplies." Major Blue watched as one trainee stumbled, clearly struggling with the heat and weight. Instead of stopping, the other trainees adjusted their formation. One took position beside the struggling soldier, speaking words of encouragement that the observation room's microphones picked up. "Come on, Walker. Push through it. We finish together." Remarkable, Major Blue noted in his recorder. They actively support their weakest members rather than allowing natural selection to remove them. "We're not trying to eliminate anyone," Lieutenant Rivers corrected him. "We're building them up. The goal is for everyone to succeed." The next facility proved even more shocking. The temperature dropped from scorching heat to what humans called sub-zero conditions. The same trainees who had endured the desert now faced howling Arctic winds and deep snow. "This is the same group?" Major Blue asked, his analysis tendrils twitching rapidly. "How long between environmental exposures?" 2 hours, Commander Stone replied. "Just enough time to check their vital signs and hydrate." Major Blue's secondary hearts nearly stopped. That's not possible. The physiological stress of such extreme temperature changes is part of the training. Lieutenant Rivers finished. "Humans are adaptable. We're teaching them to embrace that adaptability." They watched as the trainees began constructing snow shelters, their movements precise despite the cold. One trainee, the same one who had struggled in the desert, was now helping others pack snow efficiently. "Walker seems to have recovered well," Major Blue observed. "Different people excel in different conditions," Commander Stone explained. "That's why we expose them to everything. You never know what your strengths are until you're tested." The day continued with more revelations. They observed underwater training exercises where humans stayed submerged for seemingly impossible periods. They watched climbing drills on artificial mountain faces where equipment was deliberately made to fail, forcing trainees to adapt instantly. During a brief break, Major Blue consulted his species' biological database, comparing human physiological capabilities with known galactic standards. The results were puzzling. "According to our data," he said to Commander Stone, "humans are classified as a medium-strength, medium-endurance species. But what I'm seeing..." "Your data probably comes from studying civilian populations," Stone replied. "You're watching humans who have chosen to push their limits. There's a big difference. But how do you know when you've reached an actual limit? When to stop?" Stone's expression grew serious. "That's the real lesson we're teaching them. Not just how to endure, but how to recognize true limits versus perceived ones. Most beings quit at about 40% of their actual capacity. We teach our people to push past that." Major Blue observed a group doing something called pool training. The humans were tied together, their hands bound, and thrown into deep water. Instead of panic, they demonstrated coordinated movement, working together to stay afloat and eventually free themselves. "This seems unnecessarily dangerous," Representative Green commented, her color shifting to a pale yellow of distress. "Every exercise has safety monitors," Lieutenant Rivers assured them. "But yes, there's an element of real risk. That's crucial. You can't teach real survival skills without real challenges." As the day progressed, Major Blue noticed something remarkable. The trainees who had started the morning looking exhausted were now moving with renewed energy. Their vital signs showed severe stress, yet their performance was improving. "I don't understand," he admitted to Commander Stone. "By every physiological measure, they should be deteriorating. Instead, they seem to be getting stronger." Stone nodded. "There's an old human saying, 'What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.' We've turned that philosophy into a science." That evening, Major Blue added to his report, "Previous assessments of human military capabilities may be severely underestimated. Their training methods, while appearing reckless and dangerous, are actually precisely calculated to expand both physical and psychological limits. Most concerning is their ability to adapt rapidly to changing conditions and their practice of deliberately inducing failure to build resilience. Of particular note is their concept of team resilience. While many species train their military units to function as a group, Humans have developed methods that create deep interdependency without sacrificing individual capability. They appear to be simultaneously building personal strength and group cohesion, a combination that our military theorists have long considered contradictory. Recommendation: immediate revision of human threat assessment levels, with particular attention to their environmental adaptability and endurance capabilities. What we previously classified as reckless may need to be reclassified as tactically innovative. As he finished his report, Major Blue heard the sounds of singing from outside. A group of trainees was returning from their final exercise of the day, their voices unified despite their obvious exhaustion. He recognized Walker among them, no longer struggling but moving with confident steps. Tomorrow, Commander Stone had promised to show them psychological warfare training. Major Blue's analysis tendrils twitched with both anxiety and curiosity. If this was what humans did to their bodies, what could they possibly do to their minds? One thing was becoming increasingly clear. The Stellar Federation's understanding of human capabilities needed serious revision. These weren't just soldiers being trained. They were being systematically transformed. And Major Blue was beginning to wonder if that transformation had limits at all. Major Blue's sleep cycle was interrupted by loud shouting. He rushed to his window to see human trainees running in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying heavy logs on their shoulders while instructors yelled at them. His translator struggled to make sense of the angry-sounding words, but he caught phrases like "push harder" and "pain is weakness leaving the body." "They don't even let them sleep properly," he muttered, making a quick note in his recorder. A knock at his door announced the arrival of Commander Stone. "Good morning, Major. Ready to see how we train the mind." The first stop was a classroom, which seemed normal enough until Major Blue noticed the temperature was uncomfortably high. The chairs were deliberately uncomfortable, and a constant, low-frequency sound pulsed through the room. "The discomfort is intentional," Lieutenant Rivers explained as they watched from an observation room. "They're learning advanced mathematics and tactical planning while dealing with environmental stress." "But why?" Representative Green asked, her throat sacs contracting in confusion. "Surely they would learn better in comfortable conditions." "Comfort is the enemy of adaptability," Commander Stone said. "In real combat situations, they won't have perfect conditions for making decisions, so we train them to think clearly despite discomfort." They moved to another facility, where trainees were being subjected to what humans called stress inoculation training. Major Blue watched in fascination as humans were placed in increasingly challenging scenarios, each designed to trigger stress responses. "Subject Walker is in the simulation chamber now." Lieutenant Rivers pointed to a monitor. The same trainee they had been following was in a virtual reality scenario, making rapid decisions while various stressors were introduced. "Increasing heart rate," a technician announced. "Blood pressure elevated. Cortisol levels rising." "Watch this," Commander Stone said proudly. Most species would be showing severe performance degradation at these stress levels. On the screen, Walker calmly worked through a complex tactical problem, even as the simulation added elements of time pressure, loud noises, and conflicting information. His performance metrics remained surprisingly stable. How is this possible? Major Blue's analysis tendrils were practically vibrating. The physiological stress indicators suggest he should be completely overwhelmed. "That's the point of the training," Lieutenant Rivers smiled. "We're teaching them to function effectively, even when their bodies are screaming at them to panic." The next demonstration was even more disturbing. They observed what humans called resistance training, preparing soldiers for the possibility of capture and interrogation. Major Blue watched in horror as trainees were subjected to sleep deprivation, psychological pressure, and carefully controlled physical discomfort. "This seems extreme," he commented, noting how the trainees were required to maintain their cover stories, even under significant stress. "It's all carefully monitored," Commander Stone assured him, "and entirely voluntary. They can stop at any time by using their safe word." "But they don't," Lieutenant Rivers added. "That's the remarkable thing. They choose to continue." Major Blue observed Walker's resistance training session with particular interest. The trainee had been awake for 36 hours, was hungry, cold, and under constant psychological pressure. Yet his responses remained coherent, his cover story intact. "How long can humans maintain mental clarity under such conditions?" he asked. "Longer than most would think possible," Commander Stone replied. "The mind gives up long before the body needs to. We're teaching them to recognize the difference between actual limits and perceived ones." They moved to a different section where trainees were learning psychological warfare techniques. Major Blue was surprised to see them studying art, music, and cultural expression alongside traditional military subjects. To understand how to resist psychological manipulation, you must first understand how it works, Lieutenant Rivers explained. "We teach them to recognize and counter various forms of mental and emotional warfare." The day's observations continued with demonstrations of what humans called stress shooting, making accurate shots while under physical and mental pressure. Trainees ran obstacles courses, solved mathematical problems, and then had to make precise shots with their weapons, all while instructors created chaos around them. "The goal," Commander Stone explained, "is to maintain fine motor skills and decision-making ability even when the body and mind are under extreme stress." During a break, Major Blue reviewed his data and made another entry in his report. "The human approach to psychological training defies conventional military doctrine. While most species focus on maintaining calm and clarity for optimal performance, humans deliberately induce stress and confusion during training. The result is soldiers who function effectively not despite stress, but almost because of it. Most concerning is their ability to maintain rational decision-making capabilities, even when experiencing severe physical and psychological pressure. This suggests that standard containment protocols, which rely on causing confusion and panic, may be less effective against human military forces than previously calculated. Of particular note is their concept of stress inoculation, the deliberate exposure to increasing levels of stress to build resistance. This methodology, while appearing barbaric, produces remarkable results. Trainees demonstrate the ability to maintain complex cognitive functions even under conditions that would incapacitate most known species. That evening, Major Blue watched as Walker and his fellow trainees gathered for their evening meal. Despite the day's harsh training, they were laughing, sharing stories, and showing no signs of psychological trauma. "I don't understand," he said to Commander Stone. "After what they've been through today." "That's part of the training too," Stone replied. "The ability to decompress, to maintain morale, to find humor even in hardship. These are crucial survival skills. But how do you prevent lasting psychological damage? By giving them the tools to process and integrate their experiences. What looks like trauma to you is transformation to them. They're not breaking down, they're building up resistance." As Major Blue prepared for his sleep cycle, he heard singing again. The trainees were engaging in something called a cadence, rhythmic songs that somehow maintain morale despite their exhaustion. His universal translator provided the lyrics, which seemed to celebrate their hardships rather than lament them. He made one final note before sleep. Previous psychological warfare strategies against humans may need complete revision. Their method of embracing stress rather than avoiding it makes conventional psychological pressure tactics potentially counterproductive. Most disturbing is the possibility that what we consider psychological warfare might actually be viewed by humans as just another form of training. The question is no longer whether humans can withstand psychological pressure, but whether there are any psychological limits to what they can endure when properly trained. This has significant implications for future military interactions. The lights in his quarters dimmed automatically, but Major Blue found sleep elusive. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, he was sure. And somewhere in the facility, humans were probably still training, pushing boundaries that his species hadn't even known existed. The most unsettling thought of all was that everything he'd seen so far might just be, as the humans kept saying, basic training. What, he wondered, did their advanced training look like? Major Blue's morning began with an unusual announcement. Commander Stone had invited the alien delegation to participate in what he called a joint training exercise. Nothing too strenuous, Stone assured them. Just a simple search and rescue scenario. We thought it might be interesting to compare our different approaches. Major Blue's analysis tendrils twitched with interest. After 3 days of watching humans train, he was curious to see how their methods would compare to Stellar Federation protocols. Representative Green and 2 other delegation members also volunteered. They gathered at the training facility's central command center. Walker and 3 other human trainees would form one team. Major Blue and his fellow aliens would form another. Each team would have to locate and retrieve a crashed pilot in a simulated hostile environment. Remember, Lieutenant Rivers briefed them. This is just an exercise, but treat it as real. The environment will be challenging, and there may be unexpected complications. The aliens were given standard Federation rescue equipment. Advanced scanners, anti-gravity lift units, and personal shield generators. They watched as the human team geared up with what seemed like primitive equipment, ropes, basic medical kits, and simple communication devices. Aren't you giving them more advanced gear? Representative Green asked, concerned about fairness. They're using what they trained with, Stone replied with a slight smile. The exercise began in the massive environmental training facility. The space had been configured into rough terrain with limited visibility due to artificial fog. Temperature was set to what humans called near freezing, and a light rain fell from overhead systems. Major Blue led his team confidently. Their scanners would make finding the target simple, and their anti-gravity units would make extraction easy. The humans, he noted, had split into 2 groups and were moving in a search pattern that seemed inefficient. Then the first unexpected complication hit. Electronic warfare simulation initiated, announced a voice over the facility's speakers. Suddenly, all of the alien team's advanced equipment stopped working. This is impossible, Major Blue said, tapping his dead scanner. We weren't told there would be equipment failures. Neither were we, Kane Walker's voice over the radio. But we trained for it. Keep moving. We can do this without tech. Major Blue's team struggled to adapt. Without their equipment, they had to rely on basic search methods they hadn't practiced in years. The cold began to seep in without their environmental controls. The human teams, however, seemed unfazed. They continued their methodical search pattern, using hand signals when radio interference began, marking their path with simple tools to avoid getting lost in the fog. Then the situation got worse. Real alarms began blaring. Warning: environmental control malfunction, temperature dropping. All personnel switched to emergency protocols. Commander Stone's voice came over the general channel. This is not part of the exercise. Repeat, we have a real malfunction. All teams hold position for evacuation. The temperature plummeted rapidly. Major Blue could feel his body starting to shut down. His species wasn't designed for extreme cold. Through the thickening fog, he saw Walker's team moving towards them. What are you doing? He called out. Orders were to hold position. With respect, sir, Walker replied, reaching them with thermal blankets. You wouldn't survive long enough for evacuation. We're getting you out. What happened next was a blur of efficient action. The human trainees quickly wrapped the aliens in emergency thermal gear. Working together, they created a movable shelter using their basic equipment. Walker took point, navigating through the fog using nothing but a compass and their marked trail. How? Major Blue's translator struggled as his body shivered. How are you so calm? This is what we trained for, Walker answered, checking the aliens' condition as they moved. Everything can go wrong. Anything can fail. The only thing you can count on is your training and your team. They found the crashed pilot dummy during their evacuation, ironically completing the exercise's objective. Walker's team secured it without even breaking stride, treating the simulation target with the same care as their alien charges. The facility's doors appeared through the fog just as the last of Major Blue's thermal reserves were failing. Medical teams rushed to treat the aliens for exposure, while Commander Stone coordinated the facility's emergency shutdown. Hours later, in the debriefing room, Major Blue was still processing what had happened. "You knew," he said to Commander Stone. "You knew something might go wrong with the facility." Stone nodded. "We had warning signs of potential system failures. That's why we scheduled this particular exercise. You used us as part of a real emergency test." Representative Green asked, her throat sacs pulsing with indignation. "No," Lieutenant Rivers corrected. "We scheduled a basic exercise because we knew if something went wrong, our trainees could handle both the exercise and the emergency. There's a difference." Major Blue's analysis tendrils moved slowly as he considered this. "You trust their training that much?" "We trust them," Stone said. "The training just shows them what they're capable of." Walker and his team were called in for their own debriefing. They filed in, looking tired but composed. "Talk us through your decisions," Lieutenant Rivers instructed. "When the electronics failed, we stuck to basics. Manual navigation, visual signals, environmental awareness," Walker reported. "When the real emergency hit, we assessed that the alien team would need immediate assistance due to their physiological limitations. Getting them to safety became priority one. Finding the target was secondary but achievable with our remaining resources. You disobeyed the order to hold position," Major Blue noted. "Yes, sir," Walker replied without hesitation. "Based on our survival training, we calculated you had less than 10 minutes before critical exposure. Evacuation teams would have taken 12 to reach us. Sometimes following orders means understanding their intent, keeping everyone alive, rather than their literal meaning." Major Blue added to his report that evening. "Today's events have forced a complete reevaluation of human military capabilities. Their training methodology, which appears chaotic and primitive, demonstrates remarkable effectiveness in actual crisis situations. Most concerning is their ability to 1. Function effectively without advanced technology. 2. Adapt instantly to changing mission parameters. 3. Make autonomous decisions while maintaining unit cohesion. 4. Operate in conditions that disable more advanced species. 5. Complete multiple objectives under severe environmental stress. Of particular note is their philosophical approach to equipment and technology. While Stellar Federation forces rely on advanced systems, humans train extensively for situations where all technology fails. This primitive approach provides them with significant tactical advantages in crisis situations. Recommendation: immediate review of all Federation protocols regarding human military engagement. Their apparent technological disadvantages may actually be sophisticated tactical choices. As he finished his report, Major Blue heard familiar singing from outside. Walker's team was running their evening exercise, as if the day's crisis had been just another training scenario. In a way, he realized, that's exactly what it had been to them. Commander Stone had tried to tell him from the beginning. Humans didn't just train for specific situations, they trained to adapt to anything. Today, Major Blue had learned the difference the hard way. The most troubling question now was, what would happen if humans ever decided to use these capabilities for more than just rescue operations? Major Blue sat in his quarters, surrounded by holographic displays of his week's observations. The graduation ceremony for Walker's training group was scheduled for tomorrow, and he had to finalize his report to the Stellar Federation Council. His 4 eyes blinked independently as he reviewed the footage one last time. "Computer, play training summary sequence," he commanded. The displays lit up with scenes from the past week. Humans jumping from aircraft, enduring extreme environments, maintaining mental clarity under stress, and finally, saving his team during the environmental system failure. What had seemed like madness on day one now showed clear purpose. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Commander Stone entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a ritual they'd developed over the week. "Preparing your final report?" Stone asked, offering 1 cup to Major Blue. "Yes, though I'm not sure the council will believe it." Major Blue's analysis tendrils curled around the warm cup. "I'm not sure I believe it myself, and I saw it firsthand." What's hard to believe? All of it. Your training methods go against everything we know about military preparation. You deliberately create chaos, encourage individual thinking, and seem to value adaptation over perfection. Stone smiled. And yet it works. That's what worries us. Major Blue gestured to a display showing Walker's team during the crisis. Your trainees function better in chaos than most species do in order. It's unsettling. Their conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Rivers, who arrived with the final training statistics. Walker's group completed their final evaluations, she reported. Would you like to observe the results? They moved to the command center, where multiple screens showed the final testing scenarios. The trainees were being challenged with combined physical, mental, and tactical problems, all while under simulated combat conditions. Major Blue watched in fascination as Walker's team tackled each challenge. They moved like a single organism, yet each member showed individual initiative when needed. Their performance metrics were beyond anything the alien delegation had expected possible. I've been analyzing your methods all week, Major Blue said, his tendrils twitching with academic excitement. You don't just train soldiers, you remake them entirely. Not exactly, Lieutenant Rivers corrected. We don't remake them. We help them discover what they already are. What do you mean? Commander Stone pointed to Walker, who was leading his team through a particularly complex scenario. Humans have always had these capabilities. Our training just teaches them to access them reliably. Major Blue thought about the emergency situation they'd survived together. Is that why you seem so comfortable with chaos? We don't teach them to be comfortable with chaos, Stone explained. We teach them to be effective despite discomfort. There's a difference. Later that day, Major Blue attended a briefing where other alien military observers shared their findings. Representative Green presented her psychological analysis. Their training methods appear traumatic, she reported, her throat sacs pulsing with concern. And yet, we observe no lasting psychological damage. Instead, we see increased resilience and unit cohesion. Another alien observer, Technical Specialist White, shared his equipment analysis. They train extensively with basic tools and minimal technology. At first, we thought this showed technological backwardness. Now we realize it gives them significant advantages when advanced systems fail. Major Blue stood to deliver his final assessment to the gathered observers. Fellow representatives of the Stellar Federation, my conclusion is both simple and disturbing. We have fundamentally misunderstood human military capabilities. What we perceived as primitive or reckless training methods are actually sophisticated preparation for any possible scenario. He played a series of clips showing the progression of Walker's group through their training. Observe how they begin with basic physical conditioning, then layer on psychological resilience, tactical thinking, and unit cohesion. Each phase builds on the previous ones. The result is soldiers who can, first, operate effectively without advanced technology. Second, adapt instantly to changing situations. Third, maintain unit cohesion while showing individual initiative. Fourth, function under conditions that would incapacitate most species. Fifth, and most importantly, treat chaos as a tool rather than an obstacle. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Representative Green asked the question they were all considering. What are your recommendations? Major Blue's four eyes focused on different points in the room as he spoke. First, we must revise our military protocols regarding human forces. Their apparent technological disadvantages are actually tactical choices. Second, we need to reconsider our approach to joint operations. Humans have much to teach us about adaptability and resilience. Third, and most urgently, we must update our threat assessment of human military capabilities. We have been measuring them by our standards, which has led to dangerous underestimation. Commander Stone and Lieutenant Rivers attended the graduation ceremony with the alien delegation the next day. They watched as Walker's group received their completion badges, standing proud despite their visible scars and exhaustion. I still don't understand something, Major Blue said to Stone. Why do they volunteer for this? Why choose to endure such hardship? Stone pointed to the graduates, who were now celebrating with their families. Watch their faces. They're not celebrating the end of their hardship. They're celebrating who they've become through it. Major Blue's final report to the Stellar Federation Council contained an unexpected recommendation. While human military training methods appear chaotic and potentially dangerous, I recommend we begin a cultural exchange program. Their approach to handling chaos and uncertainty could benefit our own forces, particularly in crisis situations. However, I must also recommend extreme caution in any potential future conflicts with human forces. Their training methodology creates soldiers who are adaptable beyond our previous estimates, capable of operating effectively without advanced technology, psychologically resilient to most forms of warfare, able to maintain unit cohesion under extreme stress, skilled at using chaos to their advantage. Most importantly, we must understand that what we witnessed was, as they repeatedly told us, only their basic training. If this is their foundation, we must seriously reconsider our estimates of their advanced capabilities. As the alien delegation prepared to leave Earth, they watched one final training exercise. A new group of recruits was beginning their journey, running through the pre-dawn darkness, their voices raised in unified cadence. They're singing again, Representative Green noted. Always singing. Yes, Major Blue replied, his analysis tendrils moving thoughtfully. They sing about their hardships, joke about their pain, and celebrate their challenges. Perhaps that's the final piece we've been missing. They don't just endure chaos and hardship. They embrace it. They transform it. They make it their own. Commander Stone approached to bid them farewell. Safe journey, Major. I hope your report helps build understanding between our peoples. As do I, Commander. Major Blue paused, then added, though I suspect some won't believe it. That's okay, Stone smiled. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. As their ship lifted off, Major Blue watched the training facility grow smaller below. Somewhere down there, humans were jumping from aircraft, enduring extreme conditions, and pushing the boundaries of what his species considered possible. And they were probably singing about it.